Have you ever wondered why your Siberian Husky stops every few steps to sniff grass, fences, poles, and corners, as if the walk were less about moving forward and more about reading an invisible world? Many owners think the dog is being stubborn, distracted, or difficult, but a Husky's intense sniffing is usually purposeful, because the nose is doing serious work even when the body seems to be standing still. With a lean athletic frame, thick silver and white double coat, erect ears, plumed tail, and bright blue eyes, the Siberian Husky looks built for motion, yet this breed also carries a sharp, investigative curiosity. So when your Husky pauses with nose pressed into leaves, poles, sidewalks, or tree roots, the dog is not wasting time, it is collecting information, regulating emotion, and understanding the walk in canine terms. For dogs, smell is not a minor sense the way it is for most humans. It is the main doorway into the world, which means sniffing is often closer to reading than to merely smelling. In a Siberian Husky, that drive can feel even stronger, because the breed was shaped to travel, notice changing conditions, and stay mentally engaged with the environment instead of ignoring everything outside the leash. That is why trying to rush a Husky past every scent can create frustration, because what looks like a pointless stop to you may feel like interrupted information to the dog. The first reason Huskies sniff everything is simple: every patch of ground holds news, and the nose can read traces of animals, people, food, weather, movement, and time layered together in one place. A pole near the sidewalk may tell your Husky which dogs passed earlier, whether one was stressed or confident, how recently it was there, and even how often that path gets used. Grass near a curb can reveal far more than grass, because it may carry scent from a cat, a child, another dog, rainwater, dropped food, bicycle tires, and yesterday's shifting neighborhood traffic. To human eyes, the walk looks repetitive, but to your Husky the same corner can change completely from morning to evening, because scent is always updating, fading, mixing, and being replaced. In that way, sniffing is a little like checking a local newspaper written in smell, where each stop gives the dog a fresh report about who was there, what changed, and what matters now. The second reason is mental work, because sniffing is not passive at all. It asks the brain to sort, compare, remember, and interpret information in a way that can be surprisingly tiring. This matters for Huskies especially, because a dog bred for persistence and awareness often needs more than simple mileage, and a fast walk with no sniffing can still leave the mind underfed. That is why a shorter, slower, scent-rich walk may sometimes satisfy your Husky more than a longer march with constant pulling, because the brain finally gets to participate instead of only the legs. When the nose gets used well, the body often settles better later, which is one reason some Huskies return from a thoughtful sniff walk calmer than after a purely physical outing. The third reason is emotional regulation, because sniffing can help a dog lower arousal, release tension, and process small stresses without needing more dramatic behavior to do it. You may notice your Husky sniff more after a loud truck, another dog passing, a strange sound, or an exciting moment, almost as if the nose helps the body come back into balance. That is because sniffing gives the dog something organized and controllable to do, and control often brings relief when the environment has become noisy, stimulating, or emotionally busy. A slow, deep sniff with a loose tail and softer shoulders usually looks very different from frantic scanning, which is why body language around the nose matters as much as sniffing itself. Confident sniffing tends to look steady and absorbing, while worried sniffing can be quicker, shallower, and mixed with tension, head lifting, or repeated checking of the surroundings nearby. So the nose is not only gathering facts, it is also helping the Husky manage feelings, which means stopping to sniff can sometimes be a healthy emotional reset during the walk. The fourth reason is social communication, because many of the things your Husky sniffs on a walk are not random objects at all, but scent posts covered in messages left by other dogs. Mailboxes, grass clumps, curb edges, shrubs, and lamp posts often work like neighborhood bulletin boards for dogs, holding information about identity, sex, health, confidence, and social presence. When your Husky lingers there, the dog may be checking who has been nearby, how fresh the scent is, and whether a familiar canine individual has passed that exact route again. Your Husky may also add its own message there, because sniffing and marking together allow dogs to participate in an ongoing social exchange humans rarely notice fully at all. That exchange is especially interesting to social, observant dogs, and a Husky can become fascinated with one small spot because, to the nose, that spot is crowded with conversation. The fifth reason is navigation and memory, because scent helps dogs build maps of places, remember routes, and recognize how one part of the walk connects to another. A Husky does not move through the neighborhood by sight alone. It also travels through scent landmarks, where each corner, fence line, and tree base helps confirm location and familiarity. That is one reason some dogs feel more confident after sniffing familiar sections of a route, because the scent map reassures them that the world still matches what they remember. Breed character adds another layer here, because Siberian Huskies are curious, independent-minded, and environmentally tuned, so they often investigate more actively than owners expect from companion-style walkers. This is not defiance in the human sense, it is an intelligent breed using the tools it trusts most, especially when the outside world is rich with detail that morning. That is why your husky may stop every few meters, not because the dog wants to ruin the pace, but because the neighborhood keeps offering more information than the leash allows quickly. To the husky, moving forward without sniffing enough can feel a little like being rushed through a story while skipping the parts that explain what is happening around you. Leash tension can influence this too, because a constantly tight leash interrupts the nose, shortens investigation time, and may turn a thoughtful walk into a low-level tugging argument. When owners allow brief, structured sniff pauses, many huskies actually walk better afterward, since the dog feels heard, informed, and less desperate to drag back toward every missed scent. That does not mean every sniff must last forever, because walks still need rhythm, safety, and forward movement, especially near traffic, unsafe objects, or places you cannot linger. But pulling the dog away from every scent too quickly can create more frustration than efficiency, especially in a breed whose brain naturally wants to inspect and compare the environment. A gentle cue to move on works far better when the husky first gets a few real seconds to investigate, rather than being interrupted before the nose has finished there. The healthiest walks often balance both needs, giving the husky time to sniff, read, and regulate while still maintaining a shared direction and cooperative pace with the human together. That balance also makes the walk feel more like teamwork, because the person is guiding the route while the dog is allowed to experience the route in the language dogs understand best. Some walks are mainly exercise walks, while others are sniff walks, and your husky usually benefits from having both at different times rather than one rigid walking style every day. Weather changes scent intensity as well, which is why many huskies sniff more after rain, in cool air, or on breezy mornings when odor moves and settles differently. Time of day matters too, because early morning and evening often carry fresher social and environmental scent layers than a quieter, more sun-washed middle of the day. That is why the same route can produce very different sniffing behavior from one walk to another, even when your husky is following the exact same sidewalk and park path. If sniffing suddenly becomes frantic, obsessive, or paired with obvious stress signals, then the meaning may be different, and it is worth looking at the dog's whole body, not only the nose. Happy, informative sniffing usually comes with a looser tail, softer mouth, steadier breathing, and easy reorientation back to you once the dog has finished checking the scent there. Stress-related sniffing often looks more fragmented, with repeated head lifts, faster breathing, body tension, and less real absorption, as though the dog is trying to cope more than learn from it. So the best way to understand your husky is not only to ask, "Is my dog sniffing?" but also, "How is my dog sniffing, and what does the rest of the body say?" Once you start noticing that difference, the walk becomes easier to read, and the husky stops feel less like stubborn interruptions and more like meaningful canine behavior. Allowing appropriate sniffing can also improve your relationship, because the dog experiences the walk as shared instead of controlled, and shared experiences often build more trust than constant correction. A husky that gets safe chances to investigate tends to feel more respected, and respected dogs often check in more willingly because the walk no longer feels like one long restriction. This matters especially with huskies, since cooperation from this breed often grows best through fairness, clarity, and meaningful engagement rather than through constant pressure or forceful rushing alone. In a way, sniffing is one of the few parts of a leash walk that truly belongs to the dog, which makes those pauses emotionally important as well as informative. You do not need to let your husky sniff every leaf forever, but giving the dog real moments to explore often creates a calmer, richer, and more successful outing overall. The goal is not a perfect marching pace, it is a walk where body, brain, curiosity, and guidance all work together without turning every scent stop into conflict. When you see it that way, the husky's nose stops looking like a distraction and starts looking like the main tool the dog uses to understand the neighborhood around it. The grass patch, the pole, the hedge, and the tree root are not boring delays to your husky, they are chapters in the story the walk is telling today. So the next time your husky slows down to sniff what seems like nothing, remember that the dog may be reading news, calming the body, mapping the route, and joining a social conversation. And that is why dogs, especially curious Siberian huskies, love sniffing everything on walks, because for them, the outside world is not only seen and heard, but truly understood through scent. Another reason huskies love sniffing is choice, because when the nose gets to guide part of the route, the walk feels less like passive transport and more like active participation in the world. That small sense of control matters, especially for an intelligent, independent breed, since being allowed to investigate helps the husky feel involved rather than simply managed from one corner to the next. This is why some dogs pull less after a good sniff stop, because the need to fight for information drops once the dog believes the walk will include real chances to explore. Sniffing also slows the pace in a useful way, which can protect the husky from turning every outing into pure forward drive without mental balance, especially when energy is already running high. A fast body without enough nose work can leave the dog physically exercised but mentally unsatisfied, while a slower, scent-rich walk often creates a fuller kind of tiredness afterward. That fuller tiredness is one reason many huskies come home calmer after a sniff-heavy outing, because the walk finally used curiosity, memory, attention, and emotional regulation all at the same time. Puppies often sniff almost everything because the world is still new, but adult huskies continue doing it for a different reason, not novelty alone, but ongoing comparison with what they already know. In other words, the adult dog is not only discovering the world, but checking whether the world still matches yesterday, which makes repeated sniffing a form of environmental review. This becomes especially obvious on familiar routes, where your husky may stop at the same places every day, not because nothing has changed, but because those are exactly the places most likely to change. Corners, grass edges, poles, and fence lines collect movement and social scent, so they become high-value checkpoints in the dog's mental map of the neighborhood. Sniffing can also help transition the husky between home and outside life, because the first few minutes of a walk often act like a sensory warm-up for the rest of the outing. That is why many dogs seem most sniff-heavy near the beginning, when the nose is catching up with the sudden flood of outdoor information after indoor stillness and familiar household scent. If you let the husky read that opening flood instead of hurrying through it, the rest of the walk often becomes smoother, because the dog no longer starts the outing already frustrated. Sniffing helps after excitement too, because a husky that has just seen another dog, heard a sudden noise, or been denied access to something may use the ground to reorganize internally. In that moment, the nose becomes a bridge from arousal back to thinking, which is why scent work is often more useful than simple restraint when the goal is real calm. Some huskies even choose to sniff instead of pulling toward a trigger once they have learned that the ground offers useful information and emotional relief. This makes sniffing one of the most practical tools you can preserve on a walk, because it gives the dog a healthy alternative to constant visual fixation and escalating excitement. There is also a physical rhythm to it, since deep nasal investigation naturally changes breathing patterns, and those slower, organized breaths can support a calmer overall state in the dog. That does not mean every sniff is therapeutic, but many are, especially when the body looks loose and the dog seems absorbed rather than scattered or panicked. For working-minded breeds like huskies, this kind of self-directed task can be surprisingly valuable, because it lets the dog feel competent and engaged without needing a formal training exercise every minute. Some owners worry that allowing sniffing will make the dog ignore them, yet many huskies actually become more responsive when their investigative needs are respected instead of constantly blocked. A dog that trusts there will be time to sniff usually has less reason to drag, bargain, or mentally leave the handler behind, because the walk starts feeling fair instead of restrictive. This is where check-ins become important, since the best walks are not nose-only or human-only, but a quiet conversation where the dog explores and then reconnects naturally with the person. You can see that conversation when the husky finishes a scent patch, lifts the head, looks at you briefly, and then moves on together without pressure or argument. Not all sniffing should be encouraged, of course, because roadsides, trash, unknown food, dangerous plants, and contaminated spots require interruption, guidance, and quick movement past them for safety. The goal is not unlimited freedom, but thoughtful freedom, where safe investigation is allowed and unsafe investigation is redirected clearly before curiosity turns into risk. Teaching a move-on cue helps a lot here, because it lets the husky enjoy real sniffing while also learning that some moments are for leaving the scent and continuing together immediately. That cue works best when it is not overused, since a dog that gets interrupted every few seconds will stop hearing it as fair guidance and start feeling it as constant deprivation. In contrast, when the cue appears after genuine sniff time, most huskies accept it far more easily because the dog has already finished the main part of the information gathering there. Sniff walks can even be used intentionally on stressful days, because giving the husky permission to investigate slowly often lowers pressure better than trying to power through the outing at speed. This can be especially helpful after travel, routine changes, storms, visitors, or any day when the dog seems mentally full, because scenting helps make the outside world feel readable again. Even 5 extra minutes of quality sniffing can change the emotional tone of the whole walk, turning it from push-and-pull frustration into something the dog can actually process. Some huskies prefer ground scent, others check air scent more often, and many switch between both depending on wind, freshness, and what kind of information they think matters most. When the head lifts and the nose samples the breeze, the dog may be reading scent carried from farther away, which is a different kind of investigation from nose-down tracking. Watching that switch can tell you a lot, because a husky that alternates naturally between air and ground scent is often deeply engaged with the environment in a healthy, flexible way. If the dog becomes stuck on one patch for too long, however, it may help to pause, read the body language, and then gently guide onward once the inspection looks complete. The answer is rarely to rush first and understand later, because most sniff-related conflicts become smaller when the human learns to distinguish curiosity, stress, and simple unfinished information. Once you understand those differences, the walk becomes far less irritating, and the husky starts looking less like a difficult puller and more like a thoughtful animal using its strongest sense well. This shift changes human emotion too, because frustration often softens when people realize the dog is not trying to resist them personally, but trying to understand the route as a dog. And when your attitude softens, the leash often softens with it, which can make the entire outing better for both sides almost immediately. That is one reason scent-friendly walks often improve the relationship at home too, since a husky that feels mentally met outside returns with less leftover frustration and more capacity to settle peacefully. The dog's needs are not only physical miles, but information, processing, regulation, and the simple dignity of being allowed to experience the world in the way dogs naturally do. This does not make structure less important, it makes structure smarter, because the best guidance works with the husky's nose instead of pretending the nose should not matter. In the end, sniffing is not the opposite of walking. For your husky, it is one of the deepest reasons the walk matters in the first place. Every long pause at a grass tuft or fence post may look small, but inside that pause the dog may be learning, calming, orienting, remembering, and joining the social life of the neighborhood. That is a rich kind of work, even if human eyes can barely see it, and once you respect that work, your husky's behavior begins to make much more sense. Then the stop at the lamp post is no longer a delay, the hedge is no longer just a hedge, and the slow morning walk becomes a shared trip through a layered scent landscape. Your husky is not simply moving through the neighborhood, it is reading it, updating it, and responding to it with one of the most sophisticated tools in its body. So when your dog pauses to sniff what seems like nothing, there is usually something there, often much more than one thing, and the nose is busy sorting through all of it. The more you make room for that safely and thoughtfully, the more cooperative, calmer, and more fulfilled your husky often becomes on the same familiar route. In that sense, a good walk is not only about distance covered, but about how well your dog was allowed to understand, feel, and participate in the world outside your door. And perhaps that is the real answer. Your husky loves sniffing everything on walks because smell is how the world becomes meaningful, manageable, and alive.